In the peaceful neighborhood where Whiskers and Max lived, animals had their own routines and never really crossed paths. Whiskers, a sleek tabby cat, was a creature of independence. She spent most of her days climbing trees, observing the world from above, and finding solitude in the heights. Max, on the other hand, was a playful golden retriever with boundless energy. He loved chasing balls, barking at squirrels, and generally being the center of attention. Despite living next door to each other, the two animals never had much interaction. Whiskers was always perched on a high branch, looking down at Max from a distance, and Max, who had a strong curiosity about her, would often stare up at the cat with his head cocked to the side, hoping for a friendly greeting. But Whiskers, with her sharp instincts, never returned the gaze with any warmth. She thought of Max as just another loud, goofy dog who didn't understand the quiet beauty of the world from the heights of the trees. Max, however, didn't give up. Every time he saw her in the tree, he would wag his tail excitedly and bark as if calling her down to play. Whiskers would only roll her eyes and flick her tail, uninterested. There was always a sense of rivalry between them, a silent battle of who could be the most carefree. One afternoon, while Max was chasing his favorite ball in the yard, he kicked it with such force that it flew into the thicket of thorns near the garden's edge. Max, not thinking much of it, rushed toward the bush to retrieve it. But in his excitement, his paws became tangled in the sharp vines. The more he struggled to free himself, the more the vines wrapped tightly around him. He barked loudly, but no one came. Max's usually carefree attitude turned to panic. The vines were too tight, and he couldn't free himself. Up above, Whiskers noticed. From her perch in the tree, she saw Max struggling. For a moment, she thought about ignoring him, but the sight of the usually confident dog in distress tugged at her. Despite her instincts telling her to stay away, she couldn't help but feel something. Concern? Perhaps even a hint of sympathy. Max was desperate. His bark turned to whimpers as he tried to break free, but the vines only tightened their grip. His playful demeanor was gone, replaced by fear and frustration. Whiskers, observing from above, felt a strange pull. She had always been a solitary cat, and her life had been about independence and quiet. But now, something stirred within her. She couldn't just watch. She had to act. Without another thought, she leapt from the tree, landing lightly on the ground. Max, still struggling, turned his head and saw Whiskers walking toward him. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Whiskers, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cracking with anxiety. "I see you're in a bit of a mess, Max," Whiskers replied coolly, standing beside him. "And I suppose I'll have to fix it." There was no hesitation in her voice. She walked around Max, studying the vines that trapped him, and with one swift movement, extended her claws and began cutting through the thick vines. Her claws were sharp and precise, each swipe of her paw breaking a thorn. Max stared at her, shocked. "Are you really helping me?" he asked, his tail flicking nervously. He had never expected the aloof cat to be capable of such kindness. "I don't have time for small talk," Whiskers muttered as she worked, "but I suppose it's the least I can do." The vines started to loosen, and soon enough, Max was free. He jumped up, shaking off the remaining thorns, and turned to Whiskers. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. He wagged his tail, looking at her with a newfound respect. "I never thought I'd say this, but I think I owe you one." Whiskers flicked her tail nonchalantly, but deep down, she felt a sense of satisfaction. "Don't get used to it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This doesn't mean we're friends." Max nodded, his tail still wagging. "Maybe not yet, but we could be." Whiskers stared at him, unsure of how to respond. But something about the way he looked at her made her pause. Could it be possible? Could they actually be friends? She pushed the thought aside, unwilling to entertain it for too long. After all, they were so different. In the days that followed, Max couldn't shake the memory of Whiskers helping him. It was a strange feeling for him, this idea of a cat and a dog working together. He had always assumed they were too different, but here she was helping him when he needed it the most. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that Whiskers wasn't just another cat. She was something more. One bright morning, Max trotted over to Whiskers' favorite tree, where she was resting in the sun. He sat down at the base of the tree and looked up at her. "Hey, Whiskers," he called, his tail wagging. "I've been thinking, Whiskers lazily opened one eye and peered down at him, thinking, "That's a first." Max chuckled, feeling a little awkward. "I just wanted to say thanks again for helping me the other day. It meant a lot, and well, maybe we could hang out sometime. Get to know each other better." Whiskers raised an eyebrow. "Hang out? You a loud, boisterous dog, and me a calm, elegant cat." "Why not?" Max said, his ears flopping down in a playful manner. "We're not so different. I mean, sure, you climb trees, and I fetch balls, but that's just stuff. We could have fun together." Whiskers narrowed her eyes, but couldn't help a small smile tugging at her lips. She had never considered it before, but maybe it was worth a shot. "Fine, but don't think you'll be winning any races with me. I don't do fast." Max wagged his tail enthusiastically. "Deal. I'll be slow if I have to." From that day on, Max and Whiskers began to spend more time together. They would chase after each other in the yard, Max running after a ball and Whiskers climbing up trees to fetch sticks. They would sit together in the sun, each learning more about the other's way of life. Whiskers had never known a dog to be so patient, and Max had never met a cat who was so capable. But one thing was certain. Something was changing between them. Whiskers, who had always been so solitary, was beginning to enjoy Max's company. And Max, who had always been full of energy, found peace in their moments of stillness together. One evening, a fierce storm suddenly rolled in. Dark clouds filled the sky, and the wind began to howl, sending trees swaying. Max, who had always been terrified of storms, immediately ran to hide under the porch, trembling. The loud claps of thunder and the flashing lightning only made his fear worse. He had never been able to handle storms. Whiskers, who was already outside, looked up at the sky and felt a chill. The storm was fierce, but she wasn't afraid. Cats generally weren't, but she knew how much Max hated them. She could hear his panicked barks as the wind grew stronger, and something inside her stirred. Without a second thought, Whiskers jumped down from the tree and dashed towards the porch where Max had taken shelter. She found him shaking with fear, his big brown eyes wide with terror. "Max," she called, walking over to him. "What's wrong?" I can't stand the storm." Max barked, his voice quivering. "It's too loud, too big." Whiskers looked at him, her usual calm demeanor now replaced by concern. She sat beside him, shielding him from the wind as best as she could. "I'm here, Max. It's just a storm. You're safe with me." Max looked at her, his fear slowly melting away. "But I thought cats didn't like storms either." "I don't," Whiskers said, her voice soft yet firm. "But when you're with someone you care about, you find the strength to face anything." She nudged him gently, offering him comfort. The storm continued to rage around them, but for the first time, Max didn't feel alone. He felt secure beside Whiskers. As the wind howled and the rain poured, they sat together, finding comfort in each other's presence. In that moment, Max realized that their friendship had deepened far more than he ever expected. When the storm finally passed and the sun emerged, the world was quiet again. The yard, now wet with rain, glistened in the golden light. Max and Whiskers stood side by side, their fur damp but their spirits high. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're here, Whiskers," Max said, his voice filled with emotion. "I've never had a friend like you." Whiskers looked at him, her green eyes softening. "I never thought I'd say this either," she said, "but I'm glad you're here too." They stood in silence for a while, each processing the journey they had been on together. They had gone from being wary rivals to true friends, their bond stronger than any difference between them. From that day on, Max and Whiskers proved to everyone that true friendship knew no boundaries. It didn't matter if you were a cat or a dog, a loud, playful creature or a calm, independent one. With trust, kindness, and understanding, even the most unlikely of friends could become inseparable.